it is Free Wings Cosplay here. Today, after that last video that I uploaded actually over a month ago, I think, I had talked about wanting to start posting more, and then I got COVID, and my school year's been pretty heavy so far, so I haven't posted anything, but I'm working on it. I have a video in the works that actually is cosplay related. A friend of mine helped me out with a couple of little photo shoots, so you're going to be seeing vlogs for those. I wanted to start talking about books. This was something I mentioned in my update video. I wanted to start talking about some of the books I'm reading, what I'm thinking about them. We're starting on a bit of a negative note, because I decided that I want to talk about some of the things in books that I don't like, and some of the things that cause me to rank books low. In my little stack that I have here in front of me, I have 2 books that I recently read that I gave 2 stars, and a book that I recently DNF'd. If you don't know what DNFing is, it stands for did not finish, and it's sort of slang for people who create book-related content to basically say that they did not finish this book. So like their review of it might be tainted, and to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt because they didn't actually finish it. I think I'm going to start with my 2-star books and then move into the DNF. I think that's what we're going to do. So, the first book in this pile is The Woods Are Always Watching by Stephanie Perkins. This is a really short read. It is just over 200 pages. It's 221 to be exact. I picked this up on a whim. Sorry about that. The fire alarm went off. I'm a little hesitant to start filming again in case it goes off again because it was a really short alarm. We'll see if it goes off again. In the meantime, I'm going to try and at least finish talking about this one. So, like I said, really short read, 221 pages. I picked this up on a whim because I thought it was going to be like spooky happenings on in the woods. Like, the woods are always watching. It feels like kind of like ghosty, kind of like maybe some supernatural shenanigans, which was not really what this book is. You'll understand in a second. So, this book is about 2 girls named Nina and Josie. They are best friends, grew up together in this small little town. I'm going to put that down so I'm not weaving it around all over the place. They grew up in this little town together. One of them, I believe it's Josie, but I'm not 100% sure. One of them is heading off to college in a different state, and one of them is staying. So they decided to have a big sort of last hurrah together before one of them leaves. Which, like, that as like a plot hook to me is a little weak, because yeah, you're not going to see your friend all the time, but they're still going to come visit. This takes place in like the modern day, so you can text and video call like whenever you want. It seems a little weak, the idea of like, oh, you're going away forever, so we need to do one final thing together. Wasn't the biggest fan of that plot hook. Anyway, they decided to do a camping trip out in the woods near their home, and neither of them are really like backpackers or campers. And right off the bat, it doesn't really go well and just continues to get worse. This book is part of the reason that I am such a big advocate for trigger warnings to be printed in the book, because this has some really, really graphic stuff in it. Like, there's a scene where one of the characters gets shot at and her hand gets like blown off, and it's described, and you like see her reaction to like what's left of her hand, and it's really graphic. There is also there's also discussions around sexual assault in this book. One of them is actually assaulted insofar as there's like a kiss that's forced upon her, but it is implied that it's gonna be a lot worse if they don't get away, which wasn't great to read without any warning, so that was fun. I am always an advocate for trigger warnings in books, and this one definitely needed them. Plot-wise, a lot of weird things happen with this book. As I said, it's only 220 pages long, but we don't meet the antagonists, I suppose, until over halfway through the book, which I thought was kind of weird for a book that's this short, but it wasn't the worst thing. I just thought it was a bit of a strange choice that we didn't get to see them earlier on. The characters, Nina and Josie, they aren't really that likable, at least not to me, because the whole time during this book they are just arguing and disagreeing and like throwing digs at each other, and it really doesn't feel like they're very good friends, which to me was a little bit annoying to read and didn't make me unsympathetic to what happened to them, but I feel like it would have been more sympathetic to have them be these like really tight, close friends, and then having them have to go through this situation together and relying on each other and trusting each other, because there's a big issue of mistrust between the two girls in this book. So that was the big glaring issue that I had. And there were two others that come to mind that I didn't really like. For a book this short, there are a lot of red herrings. It's very obvious just from like the title alone, the vibe of the cover, the blurb on the back, that something bad is going to happen in these woods. And there are two instances I can think of for sure, and I believe a third one, of red herrings, fake outs, whatever you want to call it, where it seems like the scary thing is about to happen and then it's something else. For example, there's a point fairly early on where they notice that there's this other campsite near where they're camping, and they get kind of concerned about it, kind of uncomfortable, thinking that they didn't notice it the night before and someone was like right there and they had no idea. Come to find out it's just these two other hikers. They seem friendly, give them a little advice, and move on their way. There's another one where I believe it's Nina is out to go to the bathroom and she hears like rustling in the woods, and it turns out to be a deer. And just a bunch of stuff like that where it's like fake outs. They almost read like jump scares, like in a movie. Like it's very obviously trying to make you think that something is going to happen, and then it's just like but it's not the actual scary thing that you were expecting. I don't have a particularly strong opinion on jump scares, but I did not like the amount of red herrings that were in this. If you wanted to do one, maybe two, that's fine, but there were at least 3 in this, and that felt like too much. The other main issue that I had with this book was something that comes up a little bit later, after the 2 girls have been captured by the antagonists. And there's a scene, as mentioned earlier, where one of them gets kissed against her will, and she gets this like psychic vision of the guy and like what caused him to be like this. It says, Josie tasted rotting gums, brown teeth, rancid tongue. She saw a ragged mother, angry from abuse, mean from alcohol, and hard from drugs, who liked to humiliate him, called him names, and made him watch when she was with her Johns. He was filthy and unwashed and carried a bad odor. Kids bullied him, teachers were repelled. And it goes on to describe like the whole life of this person who is implied to be a serial killer, as well as potentially doing more than sexually assaulting the people that he kills. And I'm sure it's meant to be like symbolic, but it's written very literally that she sees this stuff. And it doesn't make sense to me. There are no supernatural elements in this book aside from this vision. And it's never addressed. This is just information that she knows, like intimate information about how he was raised, the way he was abused. And I just don't like it. The only reason I gave it 2 stars was because it was just such a short read that I feel like if you can get past that stuff, and now being aware of like the trigger warnings, if you're able to read that sort of thing, this could be really good to like pad out a TBR if you're a few books short from your reading goal. But otherwise, I would not recommend it. This is not well written. The characters are not likable. It's just not very good. The second book I wanted to talk about is called The Vanishing Deep by Astrid Schulte, or Schulte. I'm not sure which it is. This one I annotated while I was reading it, and I actually just finished it literally last night. This is another one that I gave 2 stars because I felt like the concept was good, but the execution was lacking. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. So, first thing I want to point out, if you look at this little blurb, this little quote that's written at the top of this particular version of the book, because I know there is another cover for this, it describes it as a thriller. And maybe it's just because I didn't enjoy it, but this is not a thriller to me. A thriller invokes feelings of like anxiety, a tenseness, a nervousness, and this didn't have that. It definitely tried, but I don't think it succeeded. So I would not describe this as a thriller. This to me is a sci-fi verging on a dystopian. There's a couple of dystopian elements in it, but it's not like fully committed to the bit. But it's definitely sci-fi, definitely not a thriller. Could be a dystopian depending on what your qualifications for that are. Okay, so The Vanishing Deep takes place on what seems to be Earth in the not super far off future, where there's been a massive amount of flooding. Most of the world is now underwater, and all that remains are a couple of islands, as well as like man-made, essentially like massive rafts that they call reefs that are where most of the remaining population lives. It follows a split POV between Temp or Tempest, who I believe is like the main character. I view her as the main character because her point of view is the first one we get, and it's also the last one that we get. So her perspective on the situation, at least to me, feels a lot more important. So she is like the main character. And then there is also Lore, who is sort of like our secondary protagonist. He is a bit of a shut-in. They do a lot with Lore that I'll talk about in a second, and I don't think a lot of it lands really well. But that's the point. So the main sci-fi element in this book is that there is a company on one of these islands called Palindromena, or Palindromena, who is in charge of making crops and food for people, but they've been trying to figure out a way to revive some of the dead plant life at like the base of the ocean. And they found out a way that they can revive dead plant life as well as people for 24 hours. This started as a way for them to for people who have recently deceased loved ones to have like a final goodbye, and get a little bit of closure. But in general sci-fi fashion, it's kind of devolved away from that. So there is a really interesting commentary in here about choice, about life, like who is life is worth living, and if it's okay to sacrifice one life in exchange for another or even multiple others. There's also a really interesting critique going on about concepts around like organ donation and whether or not it is ethical to essentially like keep someone alive, physically alive, even if they have no chance of like actually waking up and functioning, in order to be able to save someone else. I have my own opinions on it. I'm not going to delve too into like the moral quandary of this, but it is a really interesting question that is posed by this book. My main issue with it is that they had to add a romance. I got halfway through this book and I was really, really enjoying it. And if you look at the tabs that I have in here, my tabs are color coordinated to like reflect how certain passages make me feel. And orange is stuff that makes me mad. So you can see after the halfway point, there's a lot of orange tabs. And that's because they started leaning really, really heavily into a romance between Temp and Lore. And I hated it. They almost seem to be going for like an enemies to lovers, because Temp is trying to revive her dead sister, to figure out some stuff going on, like what happened to their parents. And in order to do that, she has to basically break her out of Palindromena. And Lore, who works at Palindromena, obviously wants to stop them. And there's more complicated stuff about like what happens when the sister Alicia's time runs out. That becomes very overly complicated. But basically, Lore's trying to stop them. Temp just wants her family back together, and they really hate each other at the start because of this. Because Lore is worried about like his friend who he replaced for the revival for Alicia, losing his job because of him. So he's like trying to get them back, and Temp, as said, just wants to spend time with her sister and have her family reunited, even if it's just for one day. So there's a really stark conflict between the two. And then they start sprinkling in things about how Temp thinks Lore is kind of funny, and Lore thinks Temp is really pretty. And it turns into a bit of a romance that I don't feel like the movie, one, established well enough to make it believable considering the circumstances, but also, if you're going to do an enemies to lovers, if you're going to do characters that hate each other and then start to like each other, I feel like there has to be some sort of like mutual respect underneath that hatred. Otherwise, it's just, I hated you and now I like you. Which is a plot that which is a trope rather, that I feel is really toxic. And you see it a lot in like really bad rom-coms, like a lot of Adam Sandler movies, for example. And I really don't like it, and it was not handled well in this book. Another case for trigger warnings that I think should exist is this book deals with self-sacrifice of a character. It comes down to a point where it's like, I won't tell you who it is, but there's basically a conflict between two characters. Only one of them can survive, and one of them decides to sacrifice themselves in order to save the other. Which generally I'm not a fan of, but the way that they did it in this one feels very suicide-y. Before the character decides to end their own life in order to save this other character, they have a bit of a monologue about how the character that they're saving is going to do so much better for the world, and how the one sacrificing themselves has like basically wasted their life, and then they aren't worth saving, and all this sort of stuff that feels a lot like the kind of things you hear from people with suicidal ideations. And it was really uncomfortable to read. Again, especially without any warning ahead of time. The last thing I will say is that the ending of this felt very rushed. The self-sacrifice happens within the last 100 pages of the book, probably closer to about the 50 pages left in the book. And we get a moment where a solution is proposed to try and save them. And we go through this whole scene, this whole chapter actually, of trying to get this to work in order to revive this character, and it doesn't work. And then we basically get like a little epilogue about what happened afterwards. And that, as like a writing choice, I don't really care for. Because if you as a writer knew that this character wasn't going to survive, wasn't going to be able to come back, you decided that the revival process wasn't going to work, why include it? It's not a huge difference, but this book could have been like 20 pages shorter if we just accepted that this character had died and then went to the epilogue. Like, I didn't need that whole scene of them trying to revive them and failing. I didn't need that. So, yeah. Really, really cool concept. really cool world. I generally like the characters, but execution fumbled a couple times and fell flat and had a couple tropes that I really didn't like. Also, like, I'm sorry if you guys can hear the construction outside. There's nothing I can really do about that. I closed my blinds to try and muffle it a little bit, but they're in the process of like adding a building onto the university. So anyway, the last book that I wanted to talk about today was The Department of Rare Books and Special Collections by Eva Jurczyk? I think it's how you pronounce it. I'll put it as text in case I'm butchering it, in which case please tell me, because I like being able to pronounce names correctly. This one seemed really interesting to me when I picked it up. I think it was actually recommended to me by somebody. It's all about this girl named Liesel. She works for a library at a university, and the whole plot centers around this like really rare Bible that goes missing, which I'll get to in a second. So I thought this was going to be like a cool mystery whodunit, a la like the old Sherlock Holmes, a la Agatha Christie a little bit. Just a really cool mystery about who stole this like super important book. I DNF'd this at around page 70. I don't remember the exact page it was that I stopped reading, but it was around somewhere between 70 and 75. First of all, I want to talk about the Bible first, because this book sets up they have a copy of this like super rare, potentially very expensive version of the Christian Bible in like a language. I can't remember what language was it in. I'm not sure what language it was in, but it was a super old version of the Bible that had been found during an excavation. The university was able to get their hands on it to preserve and protect it, essentially. And it was going to be sold at an auction to like a curator. And then the book goes missing. And never mind that the Bible, especially an old, really old version of the Bible, would be a super important religious artifact. All of the characters in this book only care about the fact that they can't sell it now, that they can't auction it off, and are going to be losing a ton of money for the university. I know people are selfish. I know there are people like this that exist that don't care about the historical significance of things like this, but it really rubbed me the wrong way that all of them only cared about it because of the money they were losing for their university. That did not sit right with me. But I was kind of willing to overlook it. And then they spent about 40 pages. Liesel spends about 40 pages. I believe it was 36 pages from the first time it was mentioned until I DNF'd, having 4 different conversations, like 4 conversations with different people about whether or not to call the police. She talks about it with the group of the librarians, her husband, I think he was like the dean. He was someone important to the university, and then another member of the staff who wasn't there for the initial meeting. She has 4 conversations over the span of 2 days about whether or not to call the police about this supposedly stolen, super important artifact. And every single time they tell her no. And I get that this would be like a really tough decision if everyone around you is telling you not to do something, but you know that you should. But why do you keep talking about it? Either take some, like, control over yourself and call the police and let them handle it, or don't, and work with the group to figure out what was going on internally. But don't keep, like, moaning and groaning about it if you're not going to do anything. That's how I feel about this. Again, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way that a lot of the reasons that they didn't want to call the police had to do with, like, the reputation of the university if it got out that they had lost this book. But yeah, no, I couldn't put up with any more of them arguing about whether or not to call the police. This book is 300 pages long. I didn't even make it to 100. I'm sure there's someone out there who would like it, but I just don't. So, yeah. Those are the books I've recently read that I didn't like. This is not to say that they are objectively bad books, but there's definitely some area for improvement. There are a number of books I read last year that I could also go into depth about if anyone would be interested. I'll put their covers here so you can kind of see what ones they are, if they spark anybody's interest that they want to hear me rant about them, because this one in particular, that one, I have a lot of strong feelings about. I actually have a lot of strong feelings about this one too. So if you want to hear me ranting about books that I didn't like, feel free to let me know in the comments. I hope you all enjoyed this little break from form. I really want to do more book related stuff going forward, because it's a part of me that I don't really super share a whole lot, and I would like to be able to talk more in depth about some of the books that I like and some of the books that I don't like. So if that interests you, if you want to hear more about my bookish thoughts, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe. There will be, again, there is a cosplay video coming out soon if you're here for that. I have not abandoned cosplay. It's just a little slowed down this year. But in the meantime, I hope you are all staying safe. It's been very cold up here in Canada, so I hope you are all doing well, and I hope that your February is going good. And I will see you all in the next video.